Tonight, the Republicans. Your host, Roger Mudd.
Good evening and welcome to part two of the Texas debates. They are organized by the Dallas Morning News, Texas Monthly, and public television station KERA in Dallas. They are also being broadcast by PBS and American Public Radio and transmitted to nearly 600 colleges and universities by the College Satellite Network. Last night we heard from the 5 leading Democratic candidates for the presidential nomination. Tonight we have 2 of the 4 leading Republican candidates in what must be the first televised debate in which the questioners outnumber the candidates. The 2 candidates with us tonight are Vice President George Bush of Texas. And Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Maine. And Congressman Jack Kemp of New York. Senator Robert Dole of Kansas decided not to participate in tonight's debate because he said debate tickets had been distributed unfairly. Pat Robertson, after conferring with Senator Dole, also decided to drop out, claiming that some of our questions, Mr. Robertson claimed that some of our questions had been leaked to the Vice President. On behalf of the questioners, I would like to say that that is not true. The questions were written only this afternoon. The organizers of the debate, of course, regret their absence, but repeat that each candidate was given 60 tickets to this debate, no more and no less. That said, this promises to be a very interesting evening because March 8th, Super Tuesday, is less than 2 weeks away. On that day, 14 southern and border states will hold presidential primary elections, and they will elect 30% of the delegates to the national conventions. We will now begin our questioning. Before we introduce our panel, I would like to introduce first Mayor Andrew Young of Atlanta. Mr. Young, of course, is a former U.S. Congressman, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Also on the panel this evening is Martin Anderson, a former economic and domestic policy advisor to President Reagan. Mayor Young and Mr. Anderson will question our 2 candidates about subjects on national security and national defense. But before we begin the formal round of questions, I have one question to put first to Mr. Bush and then to Mr. Kemp. What do you make of the decision by Mr. Dole and Mr. Robertson not to attend tonight's debate?
I think they made a big mistake. I think that the institutions that are sponsoring this debate have reputations for total integrity, and I'm disappointed they're not here. But this is a good opportunity for me and for Jack Kemp to get our views out. Super Tuesday, March 8th, vitally important. So I'm glad I'm here.
Mr. Kemp?
Well, Roger, I'm glad to see the race coming down to a 2-man race. I see an old football buddy of mine out in the audience, Roger Staubach, and I know he played a lot of stadiums that he didn't particularly appreciate the fan response. And I have played in a lot of stadia that I didn't particularly appreciate the response. But I tell you one thing, if you're competitive, you play where the action is. And this is where the action is in Dallas, and I'm glad to be here.
We will now begin our first round of formal questioning. The question is for Mr. Kemp. The subject is South Africa. The questioner is Andrew Young.
Congressman Kemp, Governor Duke Majan of California has suggested that perhaps constructive engagement has been tried and not produced adequate results in South Africa. I'd like to know what you would propose as President of the United States in relationship to South Africa and her neighbors.
Well, Andy, it's clear that our country must go beyond constructive engagement. But clearly we want to bring down apartheid and make a conversion to a multiracial democracy with minority rights in South Africa without turning South Africa over to a Marxist state, which is what happened in Mozambique, Angola, and Zimbabwe. Seems to me that we should use the same moral climate that was established at Camp David when President Carter helped bring Sadat and Begin together to work out a process by which there could be peace between Israel and Egypt. And I would suggest that the next president, going beyond constructive engagement, should be more active in bringing black and colored and white together in South Africa to make the conversion, bring down apartheid, but move towards a multiracial democracy with minority rights and make sure it does not end up in a worse state than it is today, letting the Soviet Union control South Africa. That would be a disaster for South Africa, it would be a disaster for black, and it would certainly be a disaster for the West.
Very good.
Just follow up. Do you think we should have different standards by which we judge the conduct of countries that are our friends and countries that are our enemies?
Is that question for me, Marty?
Yeah.
I think we should recognize in this world that we need to promote democracy on all continents. We cannot police the world, but certainly we can hold up that standard to which all men and women of goodwill aspire. So it seems to me that we need to, as we have in the Philippines, South Korea, El Salvador, many of the Latin countries today are living under democracies, but we should definitely, it seems to me, support those men and women who are struggling to fight for freedom in our hemisphere, whether it's Nicaragua or in Afghanistan or Angola or Cambodia. I believe in the Reagan Doctrine, and if I were president, I would actively support those men and women who are fighting for freedom in our hemisphere and around the world.
Mr. Bush. Mr. Bush, Mr. Kemp indicated that the next president should take more action than has been taken before. That implies a criticism of your administration or Mr. Reagan's administration. What's your answer to that?
More action on what?
On South Africa.
I think, first place, let's define the problem. Apartheid, immoral, wrong. Secondly, if we are successful in the policy as it relates to Angola and Namibia, this will be a very good thing. It's complicated, but there is a relationship there. And what we have been trying to do, and I salute Chester Crocker for this, is to get the Cuban forces out of Angola, have the South African forces pull back from Angola back into South Africa, and to have the UN resolutions fully implemented as far as Namibia goes. Secondly, what I'd like to see us do is to encourage, with the limited purchase we still have with South Africa, the freeing of Nelson Mandela. I'm sorry that Mandela is not willing to do what Dr. Martin Luther King did and accept the non-violent role. He hasn't done that. And indeed, he seems unwilling to do it. But I still think that it is very important that he be released from jail, and that you get Mr. Buthelezi, the chief of the Zulus, and you get him and Mandela and others into a state of negotiation with the South Africans. This isn't something where we can flick a finger. We have less influence in South Africa today, I think, and I recognize I'm talking to an expert on it, than we did before American businesses started pulling out. I'll give you an example. I have a friend in Texas who was in shipbuilding, building platforms, and mainly as it related to the offshore business. And they employed a good many black workers there. As soon as they pulled out that business, the shipyard reverted to its pre-Sullivan Principle Day designs, and the people that we were trying to help slipped back into a much less productive mode. And so it is complicated, but it has got to be negotiation between these parties, and we have to use our moral pressure on South Africa. I regret to tell you, I don't think the sanctions have been productive at all. I think they've lost influence for the United States, and the reason is the frontline countries, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and others simply cannot afford to do. That's what they're urging the rest of us to do, put on sanctions. And so you have a great big piece of Swiss cheese with lots of holes there.
Mr. Kemp, any response to that before we move on?
Well, the problem is that there are, as the Vice President pointed out, a lot of Cuban troops in Africa. And I think, with all due respect to Chester Crocker, our country should be giving more consistent support for those people who are fighting for freedom in Angola. And I am concerned, George, that clearly the State Department is about ready to make a deal in Angola, not unlike what they might do in Afghanistan, and shut off assistance to the people who are fighting for freedom before there is a total withdrawal either of Cuban troops from Angola or Soviet troops from Afghanistan. So I think we've got to make sure that the Reagan doctrine succeeds by keeping up the support for those freedom fighters until the Soviet and Cuban troops are totally out of Africa and Afghanistan.
Our second round of questioning is directed to Mr. Bush. The subject is nuclear defense, and Martin Anderson has the question.
Yes. Mr. Vice President, today, if even a single Soviet nuclear missile were fired by accident at the United States, there's nothing we could do about it. A few weeks ago, Senator Sam Nunn, Democrat from Georgia, proposed that we consider building a limited missile defense system as insurance. Given that this technology was tested back in 1984, could you tell us why the Reagan administration has not yet started to build such an insurance missile defense? And two, if you become president, would you build one?
I'd build one if the SDI research ended up suggesting that we could have a sound, perfected defense. We're not there yet, and the reason it hasn't happened is because the president is correct when he feels that premature deployment of something that isn't totally effective would do nothing but cause the Soviets to break out of the ABM treaty and overwhelm what we've got. And if you want to sit down, Marty, and talk to the Joint Chiefs, I recommend that. These are the people in whom I put great faith, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they will tell you that we have much more to lose by doing that than we would by the gain from a partial deployment.
These missiles at Lockheed, which is about 10 miles from where I live. And what we're talking about is a limited missile defense system. This is one which the technology has been proven. It was tested by the Army in 1984. It's called for in the ABM Treaty, which provides that both countries shall have up to 100 interceptor missiles. And the Soviet Union has already built their system, and it's working. And that's why I don't understand why we haven't built ours.
Because we're working on a program that would hopefully lead to an impenetrable shield. And so why shift the doctrine while you're in the midst of that research program?
Because in the meantime, if there were an accidental launch, we could not prevent the annihilation of an American city.
Well, I'm not sure you could prevent the annihilation of American city by any system that I've heard of so far.
Mr. Young, do you have a follow-up?
Oh, we can move on to
Mr. Kemp, then.
Well, I'd like to comment on the answer that the Vice President gave, Roger, which I think is flawed from the standpoint that the Soviets have already broken out of the ABM Treaty. They have developed a phased array radar system at Krasnoyarsk, which is a violation of ABM. The United States Congress voted overwhelmingly to condemn the Soviet Union's violation of ABM. In fact, I think it was with unanimity. Thirdly, the ABM Treaty is now holding the United States back from developing the early deployment of a strategic defense, not only, Marty, against an accidental nuclear launch or that of a terrorist, but the tremendous buildup of the Soviet first strike capability. And I strongly differ with the Vice President on this issue. I believe that this president or the next president, upon taking the oath of office, should immediately begin the phased early development and deployment of a strategic defense. We could put 100 interceptors right now at Grand Forks, North Dakota, that would cover part of the North American continent. And it's clear that the Soviet Union not only has violated ABM, they have begun to build their own ABM and strategic defense system in the Soviet Union. And I fear that the next president would be caught in a position in which the Soviet Union would have both first strike capability as well as strategic defense. That would leave the next president with no option at all with which to defend the American people, Europe, or Israel, and vital allies. So I would pledge tonight that if I were president, I would research, test, develop, and build a strategic defense for the United States of America and our allies in Europe.
It's not quite that simple, Jack. The president has thought this out very carefully. We are in the process of achieving something that I think the world wants, and that is an intermediate nuclear force treaty. You aren't for that. I am strongly for it. I remember taking the case to Europe in 1983, facing down the peace movement so that we could get the Europeans to do the deployment that was necessary to bring the Soviets to the table. So we have now got asymmetrical reductions in this INF treaty. They're taking out 1,600 and we're taking out 400. Now, we also have another arms control program that I think is good, trying to cut the strategic missiles in half. I think that's good arms control. I think it is good national security. I'm proud to be working with a president that has that concept. So there's another reason that the president has been unwilling to go for premature deployment, in addition to having the Joint Chiefs advise him that the Soviets would overwhelm and break out of the ABM treaty much more than this Krasny-Yars radar thing, and they're knowledgeable on this, each one of these Joint Chiefs, and that is that they do not want to disrupt what we think is a sound, strong, keep America strong, negotiate from strength policy that has led to one agreement and might well, if we're lucky, lead to another. And I want to reach out for peace, and I'm sorry, I think it is good to be doing that. And so does the President of the United States.
Roger.
Please.
George, you have now mentioned in the last two debates reaching out for peace or giving peace a chance.
Exactly.
You have yet to mention how important it is that this country stand for something beyond just peace. We are a country that respects and regards freedom and independence and democracy. And I want to ask you a question. You keep mentioning President Reagan. I'm a strong supporter of President Reagan.
Then why don't you support the INF treaty?
Well, I want to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
March 12, 1987, Ronald Reagan, our president, said that any agreement with the Soviet Union should be predicated upon their compliance with previous arms control treaties. Question: are you confident that the Soviet Union, which is violating SALT I, SALT II, ABM, Helsinki, and Yalta, are you confident that they are in compliance with all previous treaties?
No, I'm not. But I am confident that this INF treaty is in the national security interest of the United States. I am confident it is in the national security interest of the alliance. It has the overwhelming support of the American people. And I'm not embarrassed to say that I'd like to see a more peaceful world. Jack, I fought for my country in combat.
Sure you did.
I was in combat. I've been there. And you don't know what it is like until you've seen your fellow man drop dead.
I don't need a lecture.
You need to understand the perspective of one who has fought for his country. And I am going to work for peace by keeping this country strong. And this president has done it, and I'd be better to follow on because I understand what the world is really like, not some theory.
I will take a...
Will you do a brief comment and then we'll move on, please? Thank you. Mr. Kemp has the last word on this subject.
We are a country that wants peace with democracy, not peace in our times. And it was Jim Wright who talked about peace, give peace a chance. I think our country and this nation should be supporting the cause of peace with democracy and peace with freedom, and moving quickly to defend this country against the possibility of a strategic attack.
The president's not doing that?
I disagree with
All right,
disagree with
the last round of
previous
questions
statement by Ronald Reagan.
The last round of questions to Mr. Bush and Mr. Kemp in this first part is from Andrew Young. The subject is the homeless, and it goes to Mr. Bush.
We have experienced enormous economic growth in our city. In fact, if there's any place where your supply side theories and Reaganomics have worked, it's Atlanta.
Those were my theories.
But the problem we have is that more and more we see also a growing problem of homelessness,
Yes.
some 6,000 to 10,000. And I think that's nationwide, and I'd like for you to address that question for us.
Fortunately, we've taken some steps in the federal government. $390, $400 million just to address itself to the homeless problem, and working with cities. It's not a federal, total federal responsibility. It's got to work in concert with the private sector, with the cities, who I think some of them are doing a fantastic job, and with the states. We have $10 billion in block grants, some of which apply, particularly to the mentally ill. And so, Andy, there is no simple answer to it. We're talking about trying to get this budget deficit down. I'm one who is concerned about budget deficits, I might add, and I don't think that we're able to just throw much more money at it. So it's going to take innovative responses, using the cities, using the states, and the federal money that we have been able to provide, which is $400 million. I'll tell you, there is one hopeful thing that's kind of an emergency thing, but in the defense bill, there's some provision that these excess facilities, some of the barracks that aren't fully utilized, can be used to help the homeless. And so I think that we just have to keep plugging away at the problem, and I'm proud that we have been able, with the help of Congress, to make some funds available to solve it.
Mr. Kemp?
Well, I would just say that we need an all-out national, state, and local, public and private effort to make sure that no one in this nation goes without shelter, that no one goes without basic necessities, that no one falls through the cracks of our safety net, that no one goes without food and shelter. So it seems to me, Andy, that the federal government does have an obligation, along with states and local communities. One thing we've got to think about is how we can encourage more housing in our country and the rehabilitation of housing. And you know, as a big city mayor, and an outstanding one, how important it is to end the type of controls on rents that have caused the loss of rehabilitated apartments, not only in some parts of the country, but particularly my home state and in New York City. So I would say there has to be a commitment to more public concern for the homeless, but there also has to be private initiatives. We need lower interest rates, more housing, and I want to suggest that there should be decontrol of rents, which will encourage people who own property to go back and rehabilitate that property. That has to be done in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Young, Mayor Young, and Mr. Anderson. Now we're going to change our focus slightly, and we're going to call on two questioners who will talk about issues that are of particular importance in the upcoming Super Tuesday primary. They are Carl Lubsdorff, Washington Bureau Chief for the Dallas Morning News, and Paul Burka, Executive Editor of Texas Monthly. The first question goes to Mr. Kemp. The subject is Republican presidential politics, and the question is from Mr. Burka.
Mr. Kemp, if Bob Dole and Pat Robertson were here tonight, what is the major issue on which you would disagree with each of them?
Well, it should be pretty clear from the debate so far that my opposition to Bob Dole's 5 major tax increases in the last 6 years is one issue of division between us. He has suggested that while he wants to bring down the deficit, as we all do, that it is of such magnitude that he would consider freezing Social Security, he would consider an oil import tax, he would consider giving the American people what he calls, quote unquote, bitter medicine. I think the American people have had enough bitter medicine. I think they need more relief. I don't believe the American people are undertaxed. I don't believe that Social Security recipients are causing the deficit, and I think we should find an answer to the deficit that includes a lid on spending and a line item veto, which most of us support in one degree or another, but clearly talks about reducing the capital gains tax to encourage more small business formations and new jobs, and I would stabilize the dollar. I believe with all my heart that this country has missed a great opportunity in the last 15 years to give us what we desperately need, a standard for the conduct of our money that would lower interest rates to the normal level of 3 or 4% in long-term markets, which would reduce deficit costs by 80 or 70 billion dollars a year. With regard to Pat Robertson, he has the view that stabilizing the dollar, in fact, he's attacked me in Iowa and in New Hampshire, and I'm sure probably in Minnesota and South Carolina, for my views that we need a dollar that is honest and moral, as good as gold. He said it would cause a depression. You know, Pat, where is your understanding of the economy if you think that stabilizing our dollar and bringing interest rates down would cause a depression? We need a stable dollar. We need a foundation for the moral precepts upon which America was founded, those Judeo-Christian values, and I give a lot of respect to Pat for that, but I take a backseat to no one, including Pat Robertson, in my belief that this country and our party should have a conservative lodestar, but should reach out far beyond just evangelical Christians to Jew and Catholic and black and white, and I believe I could do that better.
Mr. Kemp, do you think that there's an alliance in this campaign now between Mr. Dole and Mr. Robertson? And if so, what are the implications of that?
I would be shocked, Carl, if I were to find that there's an alliance between Bob Dole and Pat Robertson.
So you don't think there's a tandem operation going that, for example, Mr. Robertson runs in South Carolina and Mr. Dole runs in Florida, and they're both trying to stop Mr. Bush and
Well, not
also...
only would I be shocked, I would be deeply disappointed that Bob and Pat would be entering that type of a alliance.
But when we came over here tonight, Mr. Bush, they told us we were going to see the ticket tonight. Is this the ticket? You can answer any question you want to. Go ahead.
Roger, I don't think George Bush wants to serve another 8 years as Vice President.
If I could address myself to the question that you asked, I think the big question is who's to lead the country, who's had the experience and the background, what I call presidential leadership. And I think it is different than being a member of Congress. I was in Congress, represented the state of Texas in Congress. So my difference with the other two would be based on establishing who has had the experience and the breadth of contacts, particularly when it comes to the foremost responsibility of a president, the national security of this country, to lead. And therein would be the main difference that I would try to develop with the others. I don't frankly feel comfortable talking about them when they're not here, but I made the case, and I think convincingly, to the voters of New Hampshire and Michigan and other. Michigan won voters, a political thing, which we won, but I think we're doing well with delegates because I think people perceive that they want experienced leadership. And I think that would be the main area that if we were here, I would try to develop different. I've got some of the same differences with them that Jack Jack mentioned on holding the line on taxes and on. I'm supporting a freeze that's a 4-year freeze. It's not easy, but it gives the president flexibility, whereas Bob Dole has a different approach to a freeze. So we got some specifics, but I think the broad question that the American voters are sorting out, who best to lead this country? Who has had the maturity and the experience to do that? And I'm very pleased with the way it's going.
The next round of questions is to Mr. Bush. The subject is education, and the question is from Carl Lubsdorff.
Mr. Bush, you have said that you want to be the education president, and yet for the last 7 years you have been the self-styled co-pilot of an administration that, at least until recently, has cut a number of federal education programs, student loans and things like that. What did you do in President Reagan's first term to try to prevent that?
Work closely with him and with the Secretary of Education in putting the emphasis on values, putting the emphasis on quality in education. You see, Carl, your question hypothecates for me that you think the answer to education is strictly how much money is spent, that you measure it by how much money is spent. I think we are going to have to spend a little more on what I call a college savings bond that gives people that are just married, they save the money, they get a break on the interest, and then when their kids get to be 18, they'll have the money there to educate them. I am for the Pell Grants and student loans and work programs, and I think you'll see in this budget it reflected in there in this Reagan budget. But don't make the mistake of assuming that it's the federal government that's got to solve all this. What I'm talking about the education president is to use the White House as the bully pulpit to encourage excellence. 93% of the funding for education is state, local, private, church, whatever. And that's good, because we don't want to control the curriculum from Washington, D.C. We don't want to tell the teachers what they have to teach. So a lot of it is encouraging excellence through various demonstration programs, calling in a school superintendent and say, you have done wonders out there, and here's an example for the rest of the country. Lamar Alexander did this in Tennessee, and he did it beautifully.
Are you basically saying that you are in accord with the cutbacks, even though now you think there should be more spending?
We have increased this year. The budget for education is going up, which I think is good. Listen, the number one fiscal problem facing this country is the federal deficit. And I want to get it down, not by raising taxes, but by doing a better job on spending. And we had to make some very tough decisions in this administration. But the quality of education, fortunately, is going up. And I think a lot of that is because the way this administration, me a part of it, has put some emphasis on things. My wife's sitting out here. She spends a great deal of her time going around this country trying to make America a more literate nation. It's a crime that 13% of the 17-year-olds are functionally illiterate. And that doesn't cost the government a dime for her to do that. And I think if people like that all over the country rally around excellence and making this nation literate, we can succeed. It doesn't have to be throwing more federal money at everything.
One more point. You mentioned You mentioned that savings bond proposal, which is in the new budget. Isn't that really, in part, another tax break for middle and upper income people? Because don't you have to have the money in order to save it?
Well, you have to have some money to save it, absolutely. But I think rich people are going to find little better ways to make savings than putting in something of that nature. So I don't think it's a savings gimmick for the rich, as some people allege. I think it's a good thing for lower and middle income families because it piles up if that interest is tax-free.
Mr. Kemp, do you have comments on the issue of education?
Yeah, I would. I heard Secretary of Education Bill Bennett the other day at the Southern Regional Republican Leadership Conference in, I think, New Orleans, make a statement that I appreciated as a father and as a father of a public school teaching daughter. He said the first Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in America is the family. And it is absolutely essential that if we're to have strong schools, both public and private, we've got to do what we possibly can at every level of government to make sure that the family survives, that the family is strong, that the family keeps control over education. And I know that we are spending about $310 billion a year on education at the federal, state, and local level. As important as that is, ultimately, teachers, principals, mothers and fathers involved in education, the chance to choose between public and private with tuition tax credits or things like magnet schools. I was the co-sponsor of the Emergency School Aid Act, which has been picked up by the Reagan administration and Secretary Bennett. We're going to spend well over $125 or $150 million using federal funds to encourage inner-city school districts to provide choice for parents. And I know in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, Roger, parents are literally taking their children out of private schools and putting them back into the public schools because the curricula of the schools have been designed around traditional education or math science or vocational, and that type of choice is essential. So we need accountability. We need back to the basics. We need to teach children what it means to grow up in a free society, not only freedom of economic or freedom of political choice, but also freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. Our children are growing up in America without understanding that this is a society predicated upon Judeo-Christian values, and if we don't teach our children what those values are, our society is not long for this earth. So I would hope that we would have that type of a commitment to values.
Our next round of questioning goes to Mr. Kemp. The subject is privatization, and the question comes from Carl Luxdorf.
Mr. Kemp, as you know, in this current administration, there has been a great effort to try to find aspects of the federal government that can be turned over to private enterprise. And recently, President Reagan made a new proposal in the space field to encourage more commercial development there. How far do you think we should go in privatizing the space program?
Well, first, let me acknowledge the fact that we need a very strong space program, Carl. It's a shame that there is rapidly approaching a space gap between the United States and the Soviet Union. A Russian cosmonaut came down recently from 324 or 25 days on their space station, and we have not been able to put that space station in space, and it is a serious problem for the United States, not only in the field of the defense of our country or in the space frontier that was acknowledged by President Kennedy to be the next great and the ultimate frontier, but it also has industrial and medical applications as well. So we need to do both publicly and privately. What has not been done in recent years is to get our space program back on track, and I would suggest that President Reagan is right to talk about some privatization in space, but ultimately this is a responsibility of the federal government to give us the type of space shuttle, space station, the lunar program, and a program that will take a man or woman to Mars. I am a strong believer in the space program, and I would suggest that President Reagan needs to have a budget that reflects the commitment of this country to being first in space, not second.
There are several other parts of the federal government in which there have been proposals from time to time to privatize. For example, one of the most areas where there's been most problems is the Postal Service. Would you favor privatizing the Postal Service?
No, I wouldn't favor privatizing the Postal Service. I know some of my friends on the libertarian right for years have wanted to privatize the Postal Service, privatize Social Security. I think that's a mistake. I think there are certain things in our society, and I say this as a good free enterprise conservative, that the government should provide as a service, and I think Social Security is working. It's not adding to the deficit, and I disagree with Pat Robertson, who has talked about privatizing it, and I disagree with Bob for wanting to freeze it. But I would privatize more housing. I'd privatize Conrail and Amtrak. I would privatize some of the huge ownership of public lands that this country has. And I think it is important to encourage entrepreneurial-minded men and women to get into those areas of the private sector that can unleash the talent not only of our country in rural areas but also in the inner cities. And I'm proud to have authored the major bill to privatize about $14 million of public housing that would give low-income inner city residents of public housing a chance to buy their apartment or their home at about 20% of the market rate. And I think that is one way of empowering the poor and giving them more control over their own destiny.
Mr. Bush, do you think private enterprise could do a better job delivering the mail in the post office?
I think it already is showing it can in some aspects of it. You've seen a big growth in privatization in the mail system. I don't want to turn the post office over to private industry, but I don't want to preclude private industry from moving in on certain parts of it. You have overnight mail service now on some private carriers that's very, very reliable. People are willing to pay the price, and public service is not being hurt by this kind of privatization. And so I support that. And I think we can see more and more of that while still keeping the concept of public service, servicing the public, I should say, that comes from a mail service that we have. But there are many examples of where these new overnight delivery services are doing a first-class job. They are making money, and it is not costing the government a dime. So yes, I'm in favor of that.
What about the federal prison system?
There's some moves there that we ought to take a hard look at all of this as we go into the 90s, where you can sign out on contract some of the care of the prisons. I mean, we're just on the cutting edge of privatization, it seems to me. And I think there's much more we can do to privatize. You mentioned a good one there.
The next round of questioning goes to Mr. Bush. The subject is reducing the deficit, and the question comes from Paul Burke.
Mr. Vice President, you want to increase spending on education, you want to increase spending on defense, you want to increase spending on the environment, you don't want to raise taxes, in some cases you want to cut, and you promise that you're going to balance the budget. Are we really supposed to believe this after the broken promises of the Reagan administration?
First place, many promises of the Reagan administration have succeeded beyond our fondest beliefs. You know, I remember what the interest rates were, Paul, 10 days before I took the oath of office, 21.5%. I remember double-digit inflation wiping out every family in America. Those that were talking about I remember unemployment going the wrong way, and I take great pride in working with a president where we have unemployment going the right way now, and you have more Americans at work than at any time in the history of this country, and you have a greater percentage of the workforce. So the one remaining problem is the deficit. And my proposal is that we put on a 4-year freeze. And it's tough because you got a lot of different programs here where you need to add a little here or there. 4-year freeze on spending. And you can allow for inflation. And if the calculations are right and we continue to grow reasonable rates, 2.8%, this budget will be in balance without touching taxes in 4 years. And the reason it works that way is because you look at what's happened now. We've cut taxes and revenues are up by 25%. I have campaigned in almost 50 states, and nobody has come up to me and said, hey, raise my taxes, will you? They haven't done that. They said control spending. And so when I say cut taxes, yes, the capital gains cut will raise $5 billion in new revenue. And I support it now, just as I supported it in 1978. And that gives you some money to use. So there's going to have to be an adjustment. What I differ with Bob Dole on, he wants an across-the-board freeze. I want the bottom line frozen, but a leadership freeze so the president can make adjustments for age research or for a college savings bond in education, and then get the spending cut like I suggested when it comes to what the Congress did on our clean water bill, our highway bill, our housing bill. They went over I'll give you an example. Clean water. We sent a bill up at $8 billion, and we are for clean water. And the Congress made it 20 and overrode the president's veto. Highways, we're for good highways. We sent a bill up at $78 billion. Congress said, oh no, make it $88 billion. Sent a housing bill at $12 billion. Congress made it $15.5 billion. So you've got to hold the line there, and that's why I want that line item veto. That's where you get the money. See, I think the line item...
Right.
Of course, the vetoes were overridden with Republican votes.
Yes.
And you did raise taxes. You lowered individual taxes, but didn't you also raise taxes, one of the largest tax increases in history, a $99 billion tax increase? I mean, there were tax increases when there were supposed to be none. I still don't see how the spending freeze, when you're going to be increasing these other areas of defense, where are you going to cut? Where are the cuts going to come?
I gave you some examples. I gave you some good examples right there that add up to an awful lot of money. And it's not easy. I'm not suggesting it's easy. And you're going to need to take the case to the American people. The beautiful thing about our system is that if I take this case convincingly to the people for the line item veto, which would be flowing power the opposite direction from the way it's been flowing. It's been flowing from the executive to Congress, and they have been doing a very bad job of it. And so what I want to do is take the case to the American people and get the line item veto, and then I think they'll act. I think the people will act. And then you can move and use what, you don't have to cut everything out, but you can reduce under the kind of line item veto I'd like to see.
Mr. Kemp?
It's the only way we can do it.
A line item veto in and of itself is not going to balance the budget. And I'm frankly disappointed to hear that the Vice President is ready to freeze the federal spending for 4 years. With all due respect, Mr. Vice President, to suggest here in February of 1988, with the problems we face on our border, with the problems we face with the influx of drugs, with the problems that we face in the so-called buildup of first-strike nuclear weapons by the Soviet Union, with the problems that exist in so many areas of our country, that the Republican Party is going to go out and tell the homeless or tell the unemployed or to tell the poor or to tell the small businessman or woman or to tell the farmer that our model for economic growth is going to create 2.8% anemic growth for the next 4 years is disappointing. We need to commit this country the type of rapid economic growth that can reduce unemployment to at least 4% by 1990. We've got to create 5 million new jobs in this country in the next 2 or 3 years. We've got to give the president a line item veto to be sure. I favor a lid on spending, but I can't believe that you would suggest a 4-year freeze. How are you going to defend that against the Democrat that will be running against us? The Republican Party is the party of the status quo, party of static analysis. What I believe we must do, Roger, or to the colleagues that asked the question, I think the American people need to be told that the largest part of this deficit is the cost of servicing or paying debt. We're paying debt at about 9% 30-year T-bill rates or Treasury bill rates. That is almost 3 times the rate it was in 1980. We must stabilize our dollar. We must get long-term mortgage and interest rates down so that housing, construction, agriculture, energy, exports, and third world debtor nations can get some relief. I don't want to see the Republican Party go out in 1988 and say we're for a freeze for the next 4 years. I think that would be boring. I think it would turn off all the young people that we're trying to win to our case.
That's
and
right.
I frankly don't think it's the type of a Republican issue that's going to win a very broad-based.
You see, I care about the deficit, Jack, and I don't think you have ever really cared about the federal deficit.
Well,
and if you want to get the interest down, get the federal deficit down. And so we've got to do that. And I'm not saying it'll only grow at 2.8. I say if you grow at 2.8, the formula works. We can do a lot better than that. But this idea that you don't care about deficits and that you vote against a balanced budget amendment and that you really never have thought they mattered, they matter. I do not want to mortgage the future of these children with more and more deficit.
It's closing statement time. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for closing statements, and each of the candidates, our two candidates, will have a minute and a half to make their closing, stirring comments. Mr. Bush, by the luck of the draw, you lead off.
Well, on Tuesday, March 8th, people of Texas, my home state, go to the polls. And they have the right, a precious right, to help pick the next president of the United States. I think they're going to be looking for experienced leadership. Fellow Texans know my record. Combat, building a business, meeting a payroll right here in the state of Texas, member of the United States Congress from Texas, ambassador to China, ambassador at the United Nations, running a large federal agency, strengthening the Central Intelligence Agency, and then serving for 7.5 years as Vice President of the United States with a president that I have steadfastly supported, a president for whom I have great respect. And the presidency's different. I've seen the cables come in, and I've seen the decision have to be made right then to crack down on a terrorist in Libya or to free some American citizens in a tiny Caribbean country. I'd want to be the president to get the deficit down. I want to be the president to follow on and build hope and opportunity for those that have been bypassed by the system. But what it boils down to is, when people go into that booth, they're going to be saying to themselves, who has the values that we believe in? Who has the experience that we trust? And who has the integrity and the stability to get the job done? I believe I'm that man, and I ask for your support. Thank you very, very much.
Now, Mr. Kemp has his closing statement. Mr. Kemp?
Thank you, Roger. 8 years ago in Detroit, and again 4 years ago in Dallas, Texas, we authored the most far-reaching, pro-people, pro-life, pro-family, pro-free enterprise, pro-peace through strength platform that this country and our party has had in our lifetime. I'm very proud to have had played a very strong role in co-authoring that platform. That is leadership. Leadership is not talking about it. Leadership is not rolling out a resume or talking about where you were born. Leadership is knowing what has to be done and doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, in March of 1988, people all over the South and then on into other parts of this country are going to get a chance to vote for the type of leader they want for the future of the conservative movement in America as well as the Republican Party. I believe with all my heart that we need someone to follow Ronald Reagan who understands how to get our economy growing at high levels of employment and output without inflation, who understands peace through strength, and who understands those basic Judeo-Christian values around which our families can grow and be nurtured and survive and expand for the future. And I believe in the Reagan Revolution, and I want to carry it forward into the 1990s and export it to the rest of the world. God bless you. Thank you.
Once again, I would like to thank the candidates and our questioners for participating tonight, and I'd like to offer a special thanks to the Student Program Council of Southern Methodist University for its assistance with arrangements and volunteers. On behalf of the debate's organizers, the Dallas Morning News, Texas Monthly, and public TV station KERA, thank you for joining us. Good night.